Hi, I'm Michael Hudson. I'm a smart building and digital strategy consultant for CBRE, and you're watching A Student's Perspective.
Hi there, and thanks for tuning in to A Student's Perspective, the weekly series that connects students with designers, manufacturers, educators, industry professionals, and design media celebrities to hear their stories on just how they've gotten to where they are now. Through our conversations, we connect the past, present, and future of design to show just how much we can learn from each other to grow towards our fullest potential without prescribed limitations. Think of A Student's Perspective as a weekly design lecture series from the student's point of view. A Student's Perspective is a division of the nonprofit University Hall of Innovation, whose goals are to connect students with the design industry through design challenges and mentorship, and a collaboration with the Marywood University Interior Architecture Program in Scranton, Pennsylvania. All interviews can be found in their video format at www.astudentsperspective.tv. For more information or sponsorship inquiries, please contact University Hall of Innovation at gmail.com. So hello and welcome back to another episode of A Student's Perspective. We are here at the Leicester School of Architecture for BIM in Leicester 2024. My name is Stephen.
I'm Misbah.
And we are here at the BIM conference. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, I'm Michael Hudson. I'm a smart building and digital strategy consultant for CBRE.
Excellent. So do you want to maybe take a step back and delve into your education, how you kind of got to the point you're at now?
Yeah, certainly. So it's quite journeyed. I studied architecture almost 20 years ago at Nottingham University, but that wasn't actually my first degree major that I decided to study. I actually went to university to study mechanical engineering, and that was very much influenced by my high school experience. But after a year, I found it very frustrating. It wasn't creative enough for me, and I never really previously had any interest in buildings at all. And I looked at the long list of all the courses I could transfer to, and architecture was the best fit. So it was a marriage of convenience to start off with, but it's something that's really shaped my career, and I really enjoyed, even if I wasn't quite maybe as capable as some of my peers on the course, because I didn't have that artistic background, but I have a very analytical and science-based thinking. And it just so happened, I was very fortunate that at that time, technologies like BIM were just starting to kind of rear their head. Generative design, all these ideas about starting to use a computer creatively suddenly meant that my skill set was really valuable. And I was able to really progress and make a name for myself studying at university. And then work for some really interesting architecture firms. I enjoyed my time at university, and I did my postgrad as well at Nottingham University, and took some gap years and travelled around the world and did lots of things like that, like a lot of students do. But when I went into the working world, I happened to just perfectly time it when there was the global economic crash. So there weren't many choices, I'm afraid, in terms of where I could go to. And I found myself working for a company that just did developer houses, effectively. Not what we were taught at university, not the big dream and the big vision. It was, let's just do small houses in out of town and all these kinds of things. And it wasn't particularly fun, to be honest with you, and it wasn't well paid. And that was the less glamorous end of training to be a professional architect, and I didn't really want to do that. Is the long and short of that. So I left or started to specialise using my BIM skills that I had learnt at university to move more into a more technical role, initially within that firm, but then use that rarefied skill to then transfer myself into more exciting design companies that wanted to take advantage of that So I was now working on much more exciting projects, if not being the big designer that worked there. So I was with doing exciting things. That naturally grew into me developing my own consultancy, doing BIM and digital-based consultancy, and then through a number of iterations, I did some very large projects which I led. I then moved into a global company that wanted to kind of hire me to lead some strategic thinking. And then most recently I've just joined CBRE, which is actually the world's largest real estate service company, which are really pushing ahead in terms of the thinking about how buildings can be run more efficiently. So all this kind of digital design thinking that I've developed over my career is what we're now speaking to clients about. So very potted history in terms of where I've been going.
No, excellent. And I think it's interesting that you started in that residential end of things, and now you're sort of bringing it back around in some way, but now from the wealth of experience that you've been able to get to kind of change where you were, what you didn't necessarily enjoy about that original experience, and how has that been for you?
Well, to be honest, it's sometimes it's more like taking advantage of what's in front of you, and realizing that that thinking is often what's in short supply, actually. The doing and the delivering many people can do, but actually having the confidence to go and be a thought leader and really back yourself in terms of the academic engagement. I continued throughout my whole career, I continued to tutor at universities and speak at them and engage and really build that breadth of understanding, so that when I was then speaking to the leaders of organisations that I do now, it's based on experience, not just kind of doing a very kind of linear route through a consultancy route, which I think adds credibility to the conversations that I have. I think that also means that I'm actually older than most people I work with, is the honest truth, because my journey has not been as direct as others. But I think that then engenders a good level of respect, because there's a recognition that I provide a different viewpoint to maybe some of my peers as well professionally. So I think there's advantages to not going the straight route.
Yeah, I think definitely being able to pull from varied interests, from varied experiences and whatnot, rather than just saying, okay, this is the way that I was taught, this is the one way that I know, so I'm just going to keep on pushing this down the road. I do think that's a really important thing, especially for students to hear. As they start to look at, okay, I'm in school, I need to do this to get a job, that's going to lead me to this one thing, and thinking that I'm going to get my first job and I'm going to stay there for the rest of my life, and it's like, that's not probably going to happen, and unless you're totally settle for exactly where you want to be. You know what I mean?
And it's interesting. Like, you know, the firm I work in now, there's great people that have been there for 20 years, and they're fantastic, and they really know their stuff, and it's that diversity, actually, I think, of people who've been there and they really are ingrained in part of the culture, and relatively new people like myself that add that kind of richness. It does work in very large firms. I've also worked in much smaller firms. In much smaller firms, it becomes slightly more polemic, unfortunately, I have to say, that actually you have people who maybe there's a perception they're only there to kind of get things in their CV, and then people who are there for the long game, and that doesn't necessarily gel as well, because companies are not necessarily set up with that level of forethought about different, more diverse views about how they would like to build their careers. I think where I've got to now is I find myself mentoring more junior people in my organisation and giving them advice about the pitfalls of decisions that I've made, but also thinking creatively about how they can take advantage of opportunities that maybe they just don't recognise are opportunities, because it's all young and it's all new, and they don't realise necessarily how good they can be. So I find it quite rewarding using what I've learned in my own way to impart that to others.
Yeah, I think that's very important, and is only going to continue to build. It's the pay it forward kind of mantra of you're not holding on to all of your knowledge.
No.
You're giving it to the next person who's going to be able to then take it to the next person and continue to push it down the road. And I think that's admirable and I think always a great way to kind of look at your own career kind of thing. So.
Yeah, I think kind of another point to kind of consider is also it's not all about work though. I think there still has to be some kind of anchor to what you're doing. I think I learned quite quickly in my professional career that I wasn't going to necessarily earn huge amounts of money working within construction and architecture. It isn't the big money earner unless you specifically go down becoming your own kind of property developer and really focus in that very, very specific area. And I had to be comfortable with that. I had to realise that actually the enjoyment I would get from my career wasn't going to be monetary. Because otherwise I was just going to be disappointed, and I would have to start again effectively. So what that has given me the ability to do is actually have quite a lot of flexibility to look at and see what the market has to offer and go after jobs that maybe a more classically career-oriented person in a different employment sector might be thinking. In finance, I've got to get the next notch up, I've got to get the next salary jump, I've got to get those kinds of things. And I realised that doesn't really motivate me. I actually want to continue learning, and I actually want to have new challenges, and that's very much more of an architect's mentality. It's the lifelong learning kind of approach, and it means that you're quite comfortable with moving around. You're quite comfortable with new challenges and having to upskill in your 40s, as I am, and actually recognise that all the things that you've done adds to that richness, but equally just around the corner there's going to be some new lessons as well, and you're going to go back to do a professional course or a school or something, and you're going to get more enjoyment out of that than you will from, I don't know, being able to afford a brand new car or something. And that's just what works for me, but it's not the same for everyone, of course.
I agree with that. As you mentioned that there's like challenges, which of course is with anything that you do in life. Because you've done a different degree at the start, do you think that degree helped you in a way in your career as an architect?
Yes.
Did that help you in any way, and how did that
I think that's a great question. I was very fortunate to have some really great tutors at my undergrad who really pushed the value of storytelling, and that is a really transferable skill in business. And as you go and talk to senior leaders in any organisation, you need to be able to bridge the gap between what their challenges are and how to resolve them in a non-technical way. And the best way to do that is to be able to turn it into a story which they can buy into, that they believe in, and they can explain to other people as well. And I think that's probably one of the biggest skills that they really teach, certainly in architectural education, that if you're going to ask people to take a leap of faith to spend potentially millions of pounds on the one project they ever do in their entire lives with you, a relative person they have no idea, have never met before, maybe they've seen your CV or a couple of buildings they've done, then you need to build that empathetic bridge with them and understand their challenges and respond to them and tell a story before you've done anything else. So that's what I still do in the consultancy world. And my engagements are much shorter. They're maybe only 3 months long, as opposed to several years. But I kind of like that too, the cadence of that. Now my life has moved on and I have children, and I put it bluntly, I can't concentrate that long anymore. It's a struggle sometimes to concentrate on the day, but that's great. That's life as well. So it's a good question. I agree. It's the skills that I did learn have really helped shape my career.
As you mentioned that you will forever be learning, what other skills do you see yourself learning in the future that you think might help you shape your career otherwise?
I think there are two things which are unavoidable, and I'm sure many other people you've interviewed have said this, is that machine intelligence will dramatically change the working environment. We already do use it in our organisation to a degree, and I think the ability to use that wealth of just human intelligence that's effectively just aggregated by AI to make you have more insight. You need to get good at that, otherwise you'll be left behind by people who can access it faster. I think that's one thing. But I think it's also an awareness of how you could continue to take advantage of that in a kind of hybrid working environment too. Because since the whole COVID lockdown happened, and a lot of organisations, mine included, have never returned to full kind of everyone's in the office 5 days a week. And being able to kind of adapt and completely shift the way in which you work personally and your time management and self-motivations. Like I used to be, you go to university or go to the office and there were people around you all doing the same task and you were there from 9 until 5, and it was all the regularity of it made it quite almost kind of second nature that you would get in and you get into your kind of working brain and just work like that. Now you've got people spread across the globe who all remote into one another, and I might be having a meeting in Singapore at 7 a.m. and then another meeting with the Bay at 9 p.m. or something, and how do I fit my day around that? How do I actually still be productive but not overextend myself and actually still value my own kind of mental well-being in that kind of environment? That's what the world is increasingly becoming. That's not going to change, and unless I make another career change, that's something I have to accommodate and have a strategy around, and it's a continual learning process.
Yeah, I think that working in that modality, especially having a family and whatnot, it's not just you figuring out how to make that work, but it's everyone figuring out how to make that work. I know when we did switch at the university to doing hybrid during COVID and whatnot, I was teaching my classes. My son was in high school, my daughter was in middle school, and we're all like within 15 feet from each other, like learning different things and teaching different things, and everyone has to just basically understand it's okay, yeah, we're home, but we can't just go and go play in the yard right now. It's like I have to do something, and you have to. So there's a lot of moving parts as you come to that more self-directed kind of way of working.
Yeah, I certainly agree, and I think just to kind of add to that point is I think probably education, certainly below higher education, hasn't really adapted to that yet.
Right.
It's still very much thinking last century. Everyone has to be attendance based, and a certain quantum of time is the value you get from education. But then that creates an expectation, and certainly some of the grads we bring into our firm now, they're shocked because there's maybe not the people they were expecting to be in the office, because they've been brought up in this whole environment of you will be check in, check out for a certain amount of time per day, and actually no, it's much more self-motivated, it's much more flexible. And I think, I'm certainly not an educator, but I think that might be one of the big paradigm shifts we see in general education for children, that it becomes much more hybridized as well for them. Goodness knows what that means for me as a parent, by the way. I don't know the impact, but I think that will shape the future workforce in a way we can't imagine.
Going back to the hybrid, has that kind of changed the way you design spaces now and look at the spaces?
I think certainly my organisation has, and myself included, have really had to listen to what clients want now. And to give two examples, you can have a major corporation which has taken out a really long-term lease of a very large space, which they simply do not need anymore. But the financial penalty for them to leave that space is so large that they have to think creatively, and they come back to us and say, what can we do? What can we do? So it can be really liberating. You can start thinking about, I worked with a very large international energy company, and they realised that they introduced a clubhouse concept and made it a destination for their employees to come to, because they had that much space that wasn't going to get used. And I think that has also had an impact on, more closer to home, my own home actually, because now my next move in property wise, one of the first things I look at is not the number of bathrooms, but it's the where's my home office going to be, or is the garden big enough for an office board, all those kinds of things, which certainly never was going to be a decision point previously. So I think it's more fundamental than necessarily just my personal approach. I think there's almost been a societal shift with how people think about where and how they're going to work, and if they're kind of locked into scenarios, how they can adapt as well. And it's a really fruitful conversation. And my specialism around kind of smart buildings and technology has really kind of grown wings in that area, because it's saying, okay, how do my clients then see the benefit of any of the things that they're doing? They're spending a lot of money. How do they actually have a way of capturing and understanding the pilots or initiatives that they've done, benefiting what they're doing as a business? And suddenly this whole notion of sensoring, which is, the technology has been around for quite a while, has suddenly become very, very useful to organisations. And big and small, they are all going to, future buildings will all be tracking where everybody is, and I think it's how you use that data, I think is interesting. Side note to that one is that I think people generally, the general person on the street doesn't realise how much they're being tracked, and I don't want to sound all paranoid here, but any free Wi-Fi you ever use it's not free. They're selling that data on to organisations to understand your shopping patterns or whatever you're doing. So it's quite benign, but they are able to work out who you are based on your web browsing and all these other things using the free Wi-Fi. So it is just interesting how clever data scientists have been able to kind of piece together personas based on a perceived freebie to kind of make the whole built environment much more digital than maybe we really comprehend.
It's kind of fascinating. I was just thinking if that could kind of help the architecture as well.
Oh yeah.
And how we can integrate that and build the spaces around the people who are actually using those spaces and the habits that they have.
Yes.
Would that something that would come in the future?
100%, and it's already happening. So in Oxford Street in the centre of London, the major retail zone, they track dwell times based on triangulating the Wi-Fi signal on your phone, so they can work out whether the right consumers are stopping at shop displays. So it's incredibly accurate in terms of understanding and targeting whether things work like that. And I think part and parcel of that is architectural design informing or attracting people. You know, how do you bring people to certain spaces, or a wider lens of kind of urban design? How does that influence the way people move around spaces or connect things together? I think all of that done well can create mutual benefits for all. And I think, you know, maybe London is quite constrained. If you look at some modern international cities, they've embedded that data from the ground up, and they are quite enjoyable places to be. But the reason why is because they've recognised that there's a causal link between enjoying a space and money to be made for the corporations that have paid for it. So, you know, it's the way of the world.
When you think about that, because I think what you've been speaking about at the conference has been smart housing initiatives and things. So how does that work? How does that work going into a residential kind of environment?
I think that's a really interesting area, and it's something which is, as a sector, quite far behind, because it's less direct and it's more complex as a scene. But certain things to do with mortgage companies that loan money, they are already assigning data points around the efficiency of a building, the home that you live in, how well you use it, with your mortgage premiums, the interest rates, or your insurance premiums. The best way of thinking about it is it's already quite well known black box car premiums. They're starting to bring that as a product to the residential home market as well, and that's a kind of key area. And another one is, just because properties have now become so expensive, is that a lot of places are going down the private rental sector, and these major investment companies are buying up lots of properties or developing new ones, and they want a lot more data too. They want to understand the movements of their residents. They're going to trade off some freebies to capture and monetize that understanding of how they use their buildings, so they can design more efficient buildings, and so they can attract retail tenants and all these kinds of things. They can understand what the actual value is of what they're developing. So it's all underpinned by a data strategy that can really influence and benefit society in general. But as always, something that has to be paid for has to also have some kind of commercial benefit as well. But I think I think the future of your home will likely be connected smart devices, a level of intelligence and security that you haven't previously experienced. I mean, I was in Chicago visiting family, and I got notifications when any cat went anywhere near my house, because I've got sensors everywhere, and it's all reporting over my local Wi-Fi network. It's technology which has become much more democratized, and that's not going to go away, is it? So it's thinking about how it can benefit you as an individual, and knowing what your appetite is for privacy as well. I think that's an important thing. Those cameras are running all the time. Do you want your children on those cameras? Is more important to some people than others, but I don't think that's necessarily in the discourse at the moment. So that's big topics to kind of consider for the future.
Right. I think with everything like this, there's always going to be the two sides of the coin of where it starts to go dark and where it actually helps. And so there's always going to be people who are like, well, no, it's always going to go one side or the other.
Yeah.
But I think there is that middle ground that becomes beneficial to both sides of the equation in some way. It's just how much can we stay in that middle ground? I think that's the biggest thing. So I think even you've already touched a little bit on where you might see the future happening, but let's go backwards.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and so where we usually end up our final question is, if you could go back to your student self knowing the things that you know now, what kind of advice might you have for yourself?
I think the easy one is always to say try harder, but I think if I had, I may well have tried on the wrong things, in all honesty, because actually I find myself in a world 20 years later where technology has come to the fore, and we couldn't really imagine it. Actually, then the idea, people were still talking about flying cars, and they still are now, and they've not really got off the ground, excusing the pun there. Whereas how data has become almost and sensoring has become almost ubiquitous, and how the smartphone has become this kind of this pocket encyclopedia to influence everything to do with the way you navigate the world, it was never at all discussed or part of the discourse when I studied. So I don't think that could have been different. I think what I probably would have done, in all honesty, is considered doing an Erasmus scheme, which I don't think you can even do now anymore, but actually spending a year in Europe, because actually one of the biggest eye-openers I have found in my career is also going to cultures and countries outside of just the UK to broaden my knowledge. And I just, I wish I'd done it sooner, in all honesty. I think I could have brought that depth of understanding sooner. So that's probably the only thing I would have changed.
Yeah. No, I can definitely see that, and I think a lot of people would benefit from that, and just understanding how appreciating other cultures is going to come back into kind of forming your own ideas in your own culture. And I think more so than ever, people are leaving their home bases, and they're establishing themselves in other places, and I think the entire world starts to become that melting pot of understanding of how we as a universal society can start to interact with each other in a better way. So yeah, no, I think it's great. I've really enjoyed the conversation. If you have enjoyed the conversation, make sure to like, share, and comment, and follow along next week as the conversation continues from a student's perspective. We hope you liked this discussion with the design industry from a student's perspective. Please like, share, and comment, and stay tuned for more inspiring conversations to come.